Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of RadialSpark Radio this year. With us today is myself, Michael Rockford, and my co-host, Justin Ludlow, in all respects because I taught him everything he knows.
I was waiting for it too. I was like, don't
Yeah.
say anything. Wait for the jab.
Yeah.
I see how
I started early. If I get the shank in there right away, then, it just gets the pain over with.
Everything he knows. I did do a little learning after the fact, but I might not have listened to everything he was saying as well. So we'll call it a wash. Is that fair?
Anyway, and also with us in the back, we've got Peyton Gherkin here supporting us as the disc jockey. He's set up all the fun graphics you guys get to see here, and also make sure we kind of stay on topic and on time as best he can.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
I will not be stopped.
Yeah, I can't rein you guys in ever,
That's fair. That's fair. Whoops. Okay. So today we've got a bit of an episode. We got some news updates that we're going to go through, a couple of new articles. We also have an interesting article that we just are in the process of publishing. And this one actually isn't about AI, exclusively about AI. But some of the news that we have is about AI. But since I want to keep things fresh and not belabor the two-letter monolith that is dominating all of tech speak these days.
Would you call it a buzz acronym? Yeah.
All right. I'm not even dignifying that with a response.
Okay.
But yeah, no, we're going to start off with a new update. So that Salesforce actually recently just launched a policy development kit, and it's intended to help developers build out API security policies, which is actually quite interesting. Relates to a lot of stuff we've been talking about over the past several weeks, and the big takeaway is that Salesforce is a very powerful and flexible internal security model, both for their API and both for just internal permissions and how and where data is accessed. But Salesforce started off primarily as just a CRM, Sales Cloud, a little bit of Service Cloud, and has really expanded well beyond that since its inception. And with that, has brought itself into different industries that have very strong security concerns and very complex security concerns. And by security, I don't necessarily mean like, hey, I'm worried about getting hacked, but it's like, who needs to have access to what data? Who gets to see social security numbers? Should anyone see social security numbers? Who has HIPAA data, PCI data, etc.? And back in the day when that really wouldn't be much of a concern for your CRM, you'd leave that off-site and maybe you talk to those systems. Now Salesforce is being more or seen more in a lot of use cases as if not the central hub, as a central hub for a lot of large enterprise organizations or sub-organizations within a large enterprise ecosystem. So that being said, this is a really cool update. I'm curious to see how it develops, because usually the first PDKs that they develop, or they're calling it a PDK, is like it's usually some bugs, some misses and whatnot, a little kludgy to get started with. But they launched this, what they're calling their Anypoint Flex Gateway Policy Development Kit, which is a mouthful.
Yes.
It is built by Mulesoft, which we like. And it's the whole purpose about it is to create security controls around their orchestrated APIs. Yeah. In and around your Salesforce ecosystem. So they've mainly focused in this article talking about cyber attacks and talking about developing of APIs to speed it up using MuleSoft and whatnot, and also making them secure by leveraging this new toolkit. And it also integrates allegedly with DevOps and CI/CD workflows. And so what does all that mean? So for the most part, I think the big thing is that Salesforce has been traditionally a consumer of external system data. So when Salesforce developers more traditionally especially due to like governor limits and things like that, have just been going out and grabbing data from other systems, whether that be your ERP, whether that be your CTI, whether that be, you know, your POS system, like whatever it is, like they're going out and grabbing data. So the security concern was more so pushed downstream outside of your Salesforce practice. So, and you see this a lot with IT organizations where Salesforce, if it is a part of the IT organization, it's a separate thing. And in many cases, your Salesforce ecosystem will be completely outside your traditional IT ecosystem. So they generally just didn't have to deal with these concerns. But now, over the many years that Salesforce is really incorporating and centralizing a lot of this data from all these other systems, it's also publishing this data outwards for other systems to consume as well. Not that it hasn't done it before, but now it's much more of a common use case to find ways to do that.
It's a banner value proposition.
Yeah, and often like a lot of the work that we do here at RadialSpark is doing enabling customers to do that in the most optimal way, getting around governor limits. And one of the articles we're going to be talking about next week highlights a lot of the use cases of why Heroku makes a lot of sense in order to expose your CRM data, your Salesforce data to your wider ecosystem and or your customers. So this is a really cool update to allow developers to more quickly and easily develop security policies. So Justin, when we talk, like you being the CTO,
technology for a second.
You'll take technology for a second. When you're talking about setting up a security policy, like what are some of the things that you're really looking at when you're developing APIs, or when you're talking to some of our customers and partners? You're like, what are some of the key things that you're hoping to see from technologies like this?
Absolutely. And I'm actually pretty excited about this article and what they're trying to do here. I do think it'll stand to see just how well they deliver on it. But to set the stage for the less tech savvy, when we're talking security policies for an API, we're talking actually about a handful of things. This is going to be access control logic, like who can hit which endpoints, and that's usually like role-based or attribute-based. And so you authenticate against that API, it identifies you, and it determines what you should or shouldn't be able to do. So there's that aspect of the security policies. But then there's also other things like all APIs are about transferring communications, requests and responses. So what is the type and level of encryption that's required for those requests and responses? How is that being encrypted? If you're doing token-based authentication or session management against an API, what is that token lifecycle? What are all these pieces? And just in that little blurb that I've spit out there, anybody who's done some development work on an API before knows like the way that you would configure access control logic, like role-based or attribute-based, which endpoints are you allowed to call? That's actually something that in your code base lives somewhere in a very different place from like, what is the lifespan of my tokens and how often do they need to be refreshed? And what is the encryption that I'm implementing across the board? They're all security, but they're scattered throughout your code base in terms of where they're implemented. And what they're trying to do with this policy development kit is basically, I almost want to call it like an SDK on top of an SDK for Mulesoft APIs. And they're basically saying, hey, using this PDK, you can define a policy in a programmatic way, and we will configure across the board the token lifecycle, the encryption that you specify, access control logic pieces, so that you can come up, like if you're in the healthcare industry and you've got to hit HIPAA compliance and you're reading something that's like encryption has to be at least this, you can define that in the PDK, and it effectively writes that code for you. So you're consolidating your security implementation within this PDK, which is interesting. And, go ahead.
Well, no, I was also going to say from like a Salesforce perspective, because I know actually my wife, who's at working in another company, she's a Salesforce technical architect, is dealing with the management of this problem strictly from a Salesforce perspective, like not a MuleSoft, like, hey, we already have it, but a lot of, like the article says, like there's a lot of value, or I think they said 33, 35%, whatever the percentage is, that there's like external value being added through API connectivity from other apps and services that you're consuming.
Revenue generation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of companies are doing that. And the way that's handled from a traditional Salesforce perspective is, and this is not like necessarily best practice, right? But this is how I often see a lot of Salesforce works configured, is there is an API super user. Tends to have some form, whether it be a superset or not a superset, whether it be like full sys level admin access, because it needs to do full object CRUD, needs all the access control logic. And then the application and the API development, which is what these guys are kind of focused on, handles what it should and shouldn't call, which is scary because they've got a gateway straight in through this user to do whatever they want. Or they set up multiple different profiles and permission sets for different APIs within the Salesforce ecosystem. So now you have a whole bunch of users or a whole bunch of different profiles, permission sets, groups, etc., of who could call what, where, which systems it's, you know, and it gets really, it gets, well, in the one sense, like adding all those users gets expensive because they're paying, you know, if they're enterprise, like $150, $200 a user a month, whatever it is that Salesforce is charging for, you know, EE and unlimited licensing, right? So it's like you've got that, which you're like, okay, for every integration now I got to tack on a user license. So they usually try to consolidate to one API user. But for a lot of these complicated use cases, like that's not sufficient. And what they should be doing is having multiple users within your Salesforce system delineated with different profiles, with different permission sets to define the access control logic within the Salesforce platform, what they should and shouldn't have access to. But again, that gets expensive because now you have to pay for each user. So, and most companies don't do that. They have like one, maybe two users, if they've got like two different use cases that are like the API user you see. And so
we definitely haven't done that internally.
Right. But I mean, again, it's a common practice, and you offload security concerns not inside Salesforce's well-developed access control logic, even though it's a little bit complicated to deal with, but it's very powerful. A little bit kludgy for other people to handle coming from outside that system. But they usually offload that to the external system. And so when you're talking about outside attack vectors, like that's a huge security risk. So from people who are looking at whether or not Mulesoft makes sense for them, and in some cases it doesn't, but if you're dealing with a lot of external APIs and you're consuming a lot of other data and enriching your own Salesforce data through other apps, through other, whether built by yourself or consumed by other people, like this is something I think that you guys as CTOs should take a look at, because it allows to, and Justin, you correct me if you're wrong, but it really allows to centralize the responsibility within one place. Like my API orchestration is all happening in MuleSoft. Yeah. My access control logic is being defined here, and my security policy for my APIs are being defined here. So I can have that single user within Salesforce that has the level of access that all my APIs need to have, which in many cases is admin. Yeah. It's usually God mode or like, you know, demigod mode. It's usually pretty high. Like there's a lot of access.
You can throw lightning. Those users have
you can at least throw lightning. You can pick up Thor's hammer. You know, you're Captain America. You're just boom.
No, 100%. And let's pretend for an instance that we're not a highly rated Heroku partner and we don't care about plugging Heroku. If you're integrating Salesforce directly with external systems, the idea of putting MuleSoft there, like what it means is, one, your Salesforce integration super user that you're working with, that's only between Salesforce and MuleSoft. And so the credentials to authenticate against the Salesforce API as that user for integration, those reside in MuleSoft. Then as a MuleSoft developer, as you're building APIs that it's like, oh, I'm pushing data into MuleSoft and then MuleSoft's pushing data into Salesforce, maybe you have your security policies set up in such a way where you're controlling who's making calls to your MuleSoft node, where your sensitive credential is stored to authenticate against Salesforce for the integration. And so having that robust security there, that's not necessarily specifically user-based, because that's the other thing that you didn't touch on, Mike, is like Salesforce's API is insanely well built for what it is. And starting as a CRM, I tip my hat to them quite literally. but it is all user based because everything was designed around, hey, you're using the Salesforce platform. So most of your API requests against Salesforce are going to require some kind of user that your credential is tied back to. Whereas like in traditional, let's say product API development, like you may be doing things just as tokens. I mean, there are financial services APIs that like authenticate with like bearer tokens, things like that, that are not tied to a user. And so Mulesoft, with their PDK and with everything here, you have your ability to implement non-user-based authentication, get these security policies dialed in, then have your one user-based piece, which is a little sensitive because if that API credential is compromised and you're doing user-based authentication, if they can get that user and then log into your Salesforce as a super user, not a good time. You do not want that to happen. So like, to me, this is all just kind of doubling down on that idea of Salesforce is like, hey, historically, our platform has been designed to be a consumer of data. We are very data greedy. Mulesoft is a consumer and publisher. They're going to be our integration bridge, and we're going to step up security there to make sure that you can feel confident using that and you can work with our systems and, you know, our quirks in a way that you're getting the best of all worlds here in our ecosystem.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where this goes. And frankly, I think the more I think it's also going to lead down the road where MuleSoft is going to be more and more inexorably tied to core Salesforce. I'm hoping that, frankly, if you get like right now, MuleSoft is a separate product, it's a separate platform, etc. But years down the line, I'm hoping that like all of your APIs are going to be orchestrated through MuleSoft. Like it's and I think this is like a step towards that and helping drive that user adoption. But for those of you guys who have lots of different systems that you're integrating with and tied in your Salesforce org, and you're like struggling with just, you know, access control logic, who needs to see what, I don't know which API, someone set up these AI API users to years ago, and I don't know if they're valid or not, or but like centralizing, this is like a step that you guys might want to look at to help centralize and get some of that control over who should see what from an external system looking into Salesforce and vice versa. So it's definitely a cool piece of technology and something everyone should be keeping an eye on and as that develops. Moving on, another piece of news, and yeah, we're gonna be talking about AI.
I was about to say now for something completely the same. Yeah,
completely the same. Let's talk about AI. So I want to talk about there's another Salesforce article talking about evolving roles in Salesforce and how to get your team AI ready. And they posted a little bit of a checklist, an eight piece checklist. It's pretty like short,
high level.
Yeah, it's very, very high level. And this kind of ties into the discussion we had at our first podcast for the year, first episode of the year. A lot of this is ground we've already covered, but I just wanted to go through this really quick because, again, and I'll say it again, like if you're a CTO, CIO, director of technology, and you guys are not looking at how to leverage LLMs, general purpose transformers into your day-to-day IT system, you're not doing your job. Like this 2024 is the year to really start doing that. And the first step of that is getting a handle on your data, which is we talked about last week. It was one of the biggest things, which is part of this checklist, is what's going on with my data. And we talked about vector database and architecture. So going through this, step one is understanding AI's role. They kind of say, hey, let's start with the basics. Does everyone in your team understand how AI fits in your Salesforce environment? Knowing the purpose and et cetera. So we've talked about in previous episodes of different ways you can leverage, whether it's ChatGPT or any LLM into your Salesforce
We've written a few articles too.
There's a couple articles too that you guys should take a look at. The Service Cloud one with Data Cloud, talking about how you can use AI and bring it into as part of your customer service experience. There's an episode Justin and I went back and forth and like, what's the best way? Should it be behind the scenes? Should it be directly interfacing with the customer? Should you have a tier 3 service rep super interesting conversation about auto transcription conversations, doing automatic searches, tying into your ERP. A lot of stuff that these GPTs could do that really help act as a high level executive assistant for any member in your organization, right? So this is where we see a lot of, I would say, low hanging fruit is leveraging GPT as a hyper executive assistant for everyone in your organization. There's also some stuff that, you know, Justin and I kind of mused about, like the ethical concerns of what jobs are going to get replaced and moved around with the advent of AI. And a lot of that rote menial work obviously could be automated. And if that's something you're focused on, is to eliminate some of the highly repetitive work that could just be completely offloaded to an LLM or a GPT of some sort, like that would be definitely another focus. That's somewhat a little bit more higher level, a little bit more automation and development being brought into play there. But that's something definitely to look out for in the coming, you know, years, is that's going to be more the norm than the exception. So understanding that role, where you want to start, and I don't think there's any wrong place to start, but you should be starting incorporating LLMs in one.
You should know what you want to accomplish. Like that is definitely step one. And that's how I read understanding AI's role. It's not like, oh, AI is important, we should have it. It's like, what do you want it to do? Is it helping you, you know, with the service outages like we had in that article example or something like that, and get the team aligned? And if I may, like the reason I think that's important is it informs step 4 on the checklist, which we'll get to a little later. But like, it feeds the other.
Yeah, and I think my point is, as a business executive or as a, you know, project decision maker, and your higher level CEO is like, something board wants AI in the next quarterly report, and you're like, I don't know what that means. The point I would make is that there's not a wrong answer here. Like, you should be doing something with AI. You need to pick a direction. So what we're doing here at RadialSpark is we're coming up with different use cases within the Salesforce ecosystem of how to incorporate that. Service outage is one of them. General automation is another that we've talked about. We're going to come up with more use cases, but there isn't a wrong answer. So depending on what your business is struggling with or whatnot, my advice is understand the lowest hanging fruit where you can make an impact that's useful for your business and leverage AI. Start there, get experience with it, go like, oh, okay, this is where it's good. This is where it's easy to work with. This is some kludge stuff. Here's where AI totally hallucinates or becomes lazy, like we talked about in the one before Christmas. So it's, again, not a wrong answer, but like you should start somewhere and definitely understand what that goal is, hyper focus on that, limit the scope, and knock out a project in the first part of this year. Like you guys should be looking at that. So next thing, number 2, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because the last episode we beat this to death. Data architecture check. Like, if your data is a total mess and is difficult to transverse, like, and that could be, it doesn't even have to be a mess. There could just be so much of it. Again, we talked about vector databases, their advantages, how Heroku could support that, how Mulesoft could help support moving data into that, how Data Cloud could potentially do that, because Data Cloud on the back end is a vector database, more AI written. Like, you need to understand what is your data challenge. So from an architecture standpoint, if you're at high volumes, you really need to be looking at some sort of NoSQL vector database. You need to set up some sort of data lake where you can make access for the AI easier to transverse your data. If that's the only problem you have, that's a great problem to have. Most people have data architecture nightmares through acquisition or through just technical debt, like
inconsistent data structures, things like that.
Inconsistent data structures, no central data steward that's like really owning of how the data should look, could be shaped throughout the organization for consistency, which makes it hard to understand what the AI's role is, because if you bad data in, garbage out, to use those idioms, again, is a dead horse beating it. But again, like, check your data architecture, figure out what are the biggest hurdles to leveraging AI are, and then start working on fixing them. Most of them, if you guys are listening to this, is probably data quality. We've got partners we talked about to help analyze and help fix some of your data quality. You should look at them or other partners and start getting a handle of the data quality. Architecture, I would honestly say, is second. They usually go hand in hand, but like again, if you're, it usually depends. But I usually see most customers have it.
They go hand in hand. To grumble. I've got a soapbox I want to stand on because I'm upset that you put data quality as number 7.
I'm gonna kick. Yeah, they put ensured data quality as number 7. I saw that on the list, and I honestly think more people suffer from data quality issues than data architecture issues.
100%.
Especially organizations that are looking to leverage AI that aren't like massive enterprises that have like 20 Salesforce orgs and all this other. Yeah, those guys are like, I need to have a data lake. I have like 18 different systems, 3 of them are from the Stone Age, like AS400s. Yeah, you got to figure out your architecture. You got to set up a data lake. You got to funnel it. That's where those organizations looking at. But most people are like smaller, medium-sized businesses that are like, how do I get involved in AI? It's like your data quality is probably a complete mess. Like it's all over the place. Your people know which systems to access where in order to get the data they need. Trying to get an AI to traverse that without doing epic amounts of development and trial and error is just not an expense most businesses are able to take on. So you have to handle the data quality thing first. And that's why I don't like how that's number 8. But again, architecture is super important. If you guys are looking for setting up hub and spokes model, just setting up a data lake or starting that process, centralizing your data using Mulesoft, using Heroku, we've got articles to talk about those architectures, how you could start setting that up. And that's something you should look at. Again, number 3, evaluating data extraction. We talked about this. It's like when we talk about vector databases, setting up your APIs like Mulesoft. How do I extract my data from my AI? Mulesoft's a great way to do that, to set up those APIs to make it super easy to pull and push that data to and from your AI system, from your LLM that you're leveraging. Using Heroku to help store that, both temporarily using things like Redis or Kafka messaging bus queue, or permanently in Postgres having a staging database for all your different systems for AI to help massage your data. That's how you could guys look at that. Looking at Salesforce Connect and Heroku Connect to then bring that data back into CRM. We've got articles you guys could review and take a look at that. Exploring AI integration. Again, we talked about this, what's the best way to do that? If you're this is a Salesforce oriented article. We just talked about security and Mulesoft. Again, Mulesoft's a great way to, if you're looking at to use, start integrating AI into your everyday Salesforce ecosystem. Depending on your budget and whatnot, looking at Mulesoft helps simplify that entire process. In particular, because, and Justin, you can jump in here too, but the big value add I see in Mulesoft is its API orchestration engine. Not so much that it's like, hey, point and click, I've got these plugins and I can tie in my stuff. It's the fact that you're able to, through a WYSIWYG, set up what gets called when, transform data in between that, and move it around in a very intuitive. And I wish I had a screenshot. We should get a screenshot for the inside of Mulesoft.
I will work on getting a screenshot. We've got something to share next time.
I'm sure Mulesoft's got collateral too, but it's just hey, here's step 1, step 2, step 3. You set up a rules engine for your data. You set up a highway of your data of how it's going to pass through all these different steps. Mulesoft's really great at that. And when you're incorporating AI, you're also able to build logic into your API orchestration layer of how and when am I queuing my AI? When does it need to reach out? Where does it need to reach out? How does it reach out to? And Mulesoft just makes that easy. You don't need it in order to do this. A lot of these LLMs, especially open source ones, have really easy APIs to work with, but then you got to have someone coding out the rules. And you could do that in Salesforce Flow Builder too. You could just do straight API. We've seen customers do that where they do API callouts all through with lightweight Apex REST callouts and using Flow Builder to trigger that. That's definitely a way to do it. But MuleSoft effectively has that on mega steroids.
Yeah. If you want to bring your data into your AI implementation from a bunch of different systems, I like that that process API layer that MuleSoft offers in their
Yeah.
architecture to be able to like, oh, I'm going to pull together customer data from like 15 different systems, and then I can give that bundle to the AI to work with as part of like it responding to a request. So it's getting data in a convenient format that might allow it to navigate and respond faster. So there's some pretty cool things between MuleSoft and like AI implementations. And if I may, like in my mind, that's where I personally see items 2, 3, 4, and 7 basically all being the same thing in this checklist. Like your data architecture and your AI implementation are inextricably tied. Where are you actually going to have your AI deployed? Is it OpenAI's hosted ChatGPT? Do you have it somewhere else? Where is its main data source that it's going to use for enriching and feeding its responses? How do you get data into there? You should only put good data into there. So your whole architecture involving, let's say, a tool like MuleSoft should involve something like, as data is getting pushed to be made available to the AI in its main data source, it's going through cleansing, it's being double checked, because as you said, garbage in, garbage out. And I like to think of the most simple use case I can for like a really effective AI is customer support, like pulling up help articles while you're on a call with somebody. You can literally take the recorded call, feed it through a transcription, feed the transcription through AI. It can pick up on the questions being asked and say, oh, you have knowledge base articles about this thing. Is this what you're looking for? If all your knowledge base articles are improperly tagged or are a mess, it's going to pull up what it thinks is a match based on the bad data in your knowledge base articles. So having high quality articles, high quality tags or identifiers for those articles, like that's what gets you the mileage out of your AI. Because what your AI is actually doing is just inferring the meaning from the conversation and then referencing a large data store to say, I think these are the things that are relevant.
And again, and I think that like that's, I'm kind of jumping around here, but we're talking about navigating AI challenges like number 6. I'm going to skip number 5 for a second, but like when you talk about knowledge articles and tags, like tags is one of the most difficult things to manage in Salesforce when it comes to Service Cloud, and knowledge articles, a huge pain in the butt. Guess what's really great at reading large volumes of text and then determining what tags you should use? GPT. Like ChatGPT is fantastic. It's like, hey, what tag should I use for this article? Oh, so when we come back to, again, it's number 7 on the list, but assuring data quality, like that's the thing. So you might be like, what Justin just talked about is that I want to have my AI, like not only Salesforce is suggesting articles, but I want it to do it before my rep even searches for it, and then search other things outside the article that might be relevant to the conversation as I'm live transcribing it. But my knowledge database is a mess, or it doesn't exist yet, or blah, blah, blah. Guess who can help you with that? AI. So that's where you start. So like when you look at like, here's my end goal, that's phase 2, but phase 1 is I need to develop this. Well, just training your AI to go through your knowledge articles to help you tag them, to help like edit them, or even write them. Like not even kidding. Like you can have it help construct it, and have some of your service engineers or whomever is in charge of building those articles, building out that data. You guys could be using AI to do that. And that's not even like having a fully developed system with MuleSoft, blah, blah. That's just like you going to ChatGPT being like, hey, here's a common use case that our customers have. Could you help write up an article for a service rep? Boom. That's a prompt you could give GPT and it'll pop something out, and then you edit it and you upload it to Salesforce. And you're like, hey, by the way, you just wrote this thing. Can you create some common tags for searches? Sure. Review it. Okay, that makes sense. That whole process from implementing Service Cloud and implementing knowledge base is such a time-consuming process that you're able to use AI to shorten that significantly. So that's stuff you guys as business technology leaders need to think about. It doesn't need to be this like huge, like, you know, AI driving smart car thing, like that level of engineering. Like you could start small, and then as you get working with it, you could start growing and building in automation after you start leveraging it. So moving on to number 5, I think I kind of talked a little bit of number 6, but we'll touch on it. But number 5, maximizing Salesforce's AI features. Again, like the way to maximize Salesforce's AI features is to have good data. Like I don't know why ensuring data quality is number 7. a lot of the stuff you're leveraging, whether it's Einstein or whatnot, or your analytics tools, are only as good as your data quality. So maximizing the use of that.
Yeah.
Like, again, the only way you're able to do that is if you fix your data, and that's where people stumble, because it comes equipped within your CRM. So it's not like there's generally not a lot of configuration that needs to be done. It's usually your data quality. So again, number 5 is number 7.
Number 5 is number 7. I would say
Yeah.
number 6 is most oftenly number 7, navigating
Yeah.
AI challenges.
Yeah.
What
I
are
mean,
the
again, and
hurdles
it's
to adopting AI, data quality.
well, and that, the only other one aside from data quality I would say would be like, where do I start? And that kind of, I think we already touched on that. It's like, you got to start somewhere. It could be just, I need to build on a knowledge base. Let me use ChatGPT to start writing up articles for me. Right?
Yeah.
Start authoring stuff that would take normally a week or several hours. You get ChatGPT to do 20 minutes with some edits from someone who is a subject matter expert. Like, so you really shorten that process, especially from whether it's customer service stuff, marketing stuff. If you're doing marketing automation through Pardot or anything else, and you're trying to build out articles or smart emails or whatnot, like, that's where you can start using GPT. And then once you get used to, okay, here's the business use case, I'm adopting it, now I want to automate. So start with getting your team to leverage it. Here at RadialSpark, some of the stuff that we're doing, and I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast, is what do all engineers absolutely hate doing? Writing technical documentation, writing comments. What do we make all of our developers do? Write comments, write technical documentation. What can AI do really well? It could read code and write comments and technical documentation. So what we tell our guys to do is like, yo, when you finish this class or this series of classes, run this through GPT and tell it to write up
the document.
just write the docs, like write the comments, put some stuff. Like, again, they're like, that's not crazy. We're not doing some like crazy AI implementation, you know? So it's like, again, like looking at some places to do that where it makes sense. Again, if you have very sensitive code and you need to have internal security, you can't just have like ChatGPT as an example, just broadcast, like, because have the code, like then you have to have your private one. But starting looking at some of the most simple things you can do just to incorporate it. It doesn't have to be a big multi-million-dollar implementation, right? It could just start as like, hey, you guys on this team here's a private install of your LLM, whether it's GPT or whatever, use it to do this process. Have it incorporate in your day-to-day process. Start there. And then just like any other tool, like when someone uses Salesforce, like when we do initial Salesforce implementations, we recommend our customers to try to keep it as bare bones as possible, configured for their business, and don't automate anything until they've used it for a couple of weeks or months. And then after they've used it and their team is involved, they're like, okay, here's the workflows that we want to have automated because we do this all the time and this sucks. Like, I don't like doing this, or these tabs are over here and I want them here. Same thing with AI. Just start leveraging it in a manual fashion and then start incorporating it into your apps, into your CRM, into your marketing automation, into your customer service. That's what you need to be looking at. So, hey, number 7, ensuring data quality. I think we've talked about that.
I was going to say, I think we can skip
over
this one. It's not that important.
It's not that important because it's only number 7. It should be number 1. Like, I really disagree.
I'm with you. Like I said, soapbox out for a second.
Yeah, number 8, I feel is a bit of a cop out in this article, just to be honest. Like, future-proofing your organization for AI. Like, again, I'm just going to be honest. You're not going to be able to future-proof your organization from AI. This is extremely disruptive. We're at the very bleeding edge of what's being worked on right now. And there's even what's actually being developed beyond that, we don't even have access to yet. And the way tech runs in business is we're, T plus 5 years. So like what the stuff we're doing right now, and people are talking about incorporating it, isn't going to be the norm for the next 5 years. If it follows every other, whether it's mobile, whether it's big data, whether it's API, like any cloud, like doesn't matter. Like it's going to take people time to adapt. So, and this particular technology, I feel, is going to be particularly disruptive. I don't think there's a way to future-proof. Like what he recommends is stay up to date with AI news, So tune into the RadialSpark podcast to figure out what's new with AI we need to pay attention
Try
to.
not to talk about AI too much, but it comes up occasionally.
Like and subscribe, leave a comment. There's shameless plug. But the reality is that, again, like aside from like looking at what's going on, what Salesforce is doing, what these other big powerhouses are doing, whether it's Google or AWS or open source like GPT, looking at those features and functionalities. But I think the most important thing to future-proof your organization for AI is to start using it today. Get a project going, whether that's just telling a team to, hey, here's your private paid for access to this particular LLM. Use it for this business use case. I wanted to enhance your day-to-day process, constructing emails, writing articles, something more complex that Justin and I just talked about, like integrating with your customer service. Wherever you want to start somewhere. You have to. That's 2024 advice.
And if I may, I think I've got something quick to add here. I actually think of the advent of AI, and I just realized that this is going to sound a little cartoonish, but I think the advent of AI is very similar to the advent of like BI, like large scale data reporting, trend analysis, things like that. Any of you who have implemented large scale BI systems, you know that the data structures that are effective for working in like a BI context and going over large amounts of data are very different from the data structures you want to use when you're interacting with that data on a day-to-day basis as part of your regular operations. And that's really what we're talking about here. And it means that you're going to be facing two challenges when you look to adopt AI down the road. One, do you have your data in a place where you can easily transform it so that it is accessible to AI to accomplish the goal you want to do? And you know, going from like third order normal form, scary tech word alert there, into something that's a little more flat or snowflake shaped for those of you familiar with the Snowflake product. Whatever that data you need to do what you want to do, you're going to have to be able to transform it, and you're going to need it in a good quality. So what you should at a bare minimum be thinking about is like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with AI yet, but what is the state of my data and my data stewardship program today? Because if you have junk data and it's not clean, and you have no way to centralize it, put it in a data lake, understand how to transform it, when you decide you're ready for AI, you're going to have to figure out the transformations to make it AI accessible. And then you're also going to have to figure out all the data quality issues. If you at least do your spring cleaning now, then you're only going to be worried about whatever we ultimately decide is the most effective data model structure for AI transversal, like in the future, which we probably haven't fully settled on yet. And depending on your use case, it could vary. But transforming junk data is wasted effort and a harder challenge. So data stewardship, that's going to be the one. Future proof for AI by cleaning up your data today. Be environmentally friendly for your data environment.
Yeah, so number 7 is the takeaway from this article is number 7.
Number 8 is number 7. Everything is number 7. Let's just be clear. Number 7.
All right, let's move on.
We should.
To bed. And we're actually got an article that we just actually wrapped up that we're publishing today. And this doesn't actually have to deal directly with AI, but again, could. But we're going to talk about Heroku Mulesoft, better application development. And we did talk about how Heroku's better together with Mulesoft, how Mulesoft enhances Heroku's features. This is the reverse, effectively. It's kind of like similar ground that we've tried it on, but effectively, the highlight here is how does Heroku help Mulesoft be better at doing what Mulesoft does? We've touched on that.
Real quick, flip it. The first article was how does Heroku make Mulesoft be better at what Mulesoft does? This one is how Mulesoft makes Heroku better at what it does.
Yeah, sorry. They're similar concepts, but coming in a different direction. But yeah, so this is how Mulesoft makes application development on Heroku even better. So we've talked about the reverse. We're going to talk about this, why each perspective is important, and what to look out, or not to what to look out for, but why are these two things together? Because it's like, well, you know, Heroku does APIs. Like, why do I need to also have Mulesoft do API? I don't get it. Like, which isn't it the same thing? Which, frankly, we've talked to some technical architects at Salesforce who think that. they're wrong. And so we're going to walk them through and walk everyone else through. It's like, hey, this is how these two things really, and I hate to use the word, but I will, synergize together. So Justin, since you authored this one, this is your baby.
Yes.
Why don't you take it away and
I'm excited.
Walk us through it.
Yeah. So taking the table setting that Mike's already given us here, I actually even want to take one step back from Heroku for a second, because the advantage here is really tied to traditional web development. So if we think about your favorite technology stack, the mean stack, or maybe it's RadialSpark's plan stack. It's a pretty cool stack too. In there, you have a backend framework you're working with: Express for mean, Loopback for plan, and then in both cases, your front end framework is going to be Angular. Now, your Angular framework is designed to deliver your front end application. So it's going to also deliver a front end API for the complex interactions inside of the UI of that application. Your backend framework, Express or Loopback, that's going to provide your data access API. You're like, oh, here's my data model. I need CRUD endpoints for all of it. Let me set that up. When you're just looking at those tech stacks, there's a momentary like, now hold on, isn't there kind of a gap here? Because if Express is making an API to access the data, and Angular is making an API to access like front-end interactions and facilitate complicated processes, but they're not the same API. They don't talk to each other. So how does this work? And like this simple answer is you might build some shared Angular services that then consume your Express or Loopback backend API to be able to access and interface with your backend data, which is fine, but it means a few things. It means, one, you can update your front end without updating your backend, but you can't update your backend without updating your front end, because the consuming client code for your backend API is actually part of your Angular app. And normally when you deploy something like this on Heroku, which is where we're bringing back to Heroku, you end up having like two apps that you deploy to Heroku. Your Angular app, which is responsible for serving the application and serving the API, the front end API that interfaces with that application. And then you have your backend app, which would have your, maybe a Postgres database and your Loopback API and the data access controls through that API for the data in your Postgres. That Angular app then has code that consumes your backend apps API. Every time you update the backend apps API, you also have to update your front end. So it's a little brittle. They're a little closely coupled. And quite frankly, it's all still custom coded, which I don't entirely love. So in my mind, this is something for a long time I've been like, what is the best way to do this? And when we first started the Better Together series, because the very first article I ever wrote was the article that was the inverse of this: how does Heroku make MuleSoft better? And I kind of had this aha moment where I was like, oh, I'm kind of an idiot. Why didn't I think of this? MuleSoft process APIs are designed to live between front-end experience APIs and back-end system APIs. That should be the glue that ties your two different Heroku apps, front-end and back-end, together. And by doing that, it means that everything else you've connected through MuleSoft, all your other system APIs for existing IT structures, all of that, those process APIs can be used by your Angular Experience API to surface data across multiple systems. So you get a looser coupling by inserting MuleSoft into the middle. You're getting maximum mileage from your developers by using the development artifacts that are already created by the frameworks they're familiar with: Angular, Vue, React, Express, Loopback. So you're basically saying, hey, apparently before anybody actually consciously thought about this, we've already pretty well understood how to develop experience and system APIs. Process APIs haven't necessarily been a thing prominent in traditional web development. MuleSoft can bring that to the table, and with it, bring that interconnectedness to all your other systems, to all your other things, as well as that loose coupling. And additionally, because you're then taking your, let's say, your new application API that you've made on Heroku for this new app you've delivered, by consuming that through a MuleSoft process API, that is now also available to all of your other existing MuleSoft connected systems. So you have launched a new product that can reuse all your existing IT connections and integrations, and all the data that is now being sourced or driven on this new product is now available to all your existing IT connected, integrations through MuleSoft. So very powerful stuff right there, just right on the tip of it. But the other thing that then stems from that realization is this: new product development or new experience development in and of itself can now be seen as like an incremental endeavor. There's no longer I need to develop this external facing customer experience, so I need to migrate all of my customer data from Salesforce or my ERP or wherever into a backend application database so that my application knows who my customers are and I can build a user system on top of that. You can build a user system that accesses the data that's already in the other systems. So now your new application development is actually strictly just focused on what are those things that don't actually exist anywhere else in your IT. You are constantly creating new rather than trying to transpose or rebuild stuff you already have in a place that's convenient for the new app. And that in and of itself is a huge DevOps efficiency boost. It's crazy. I can't overstate like how powerful that concept is. I'll take a second to stop, because if I don't, no one will be able to stop me. So Mike or Peyton, man in the back yelling, everyone attack. You guys have questions about what I've said there? Is there something you want me to dig into a little further?
Well, I'm thinking like you go to number 4 when you, in the article where you're talking about stitching together Heroku apps while optimizing MuleSoft. So like the interesting thing that you mentioned, it's like that brittle, tightly coupled, like, because you like normally if you're in the Heroku sphere, like you've got your web dyno and you've got your backend, API dyno or whatever. They're totally separate. Like, one's for your front end, one's for your back end, one's for your database, one's for your process,
Exactly.
And so when you bolt MuleSoft in here, now MuleSoft is still tightly coupled, but like from your standpoint, and I think we've talked about this too, it's like that whole, and again, I wish I had a screenshot. We should update the article to include one. Just the ability to orchestrate those APIs in a WYSIWYG way. I think it really, without having to like completely recode, whole files.
If you don't mind me walking through an example, I'm totally happy to.
Yeah. Like, I think what's a specific business level example that it's like, why do I care? It's like,
let's talk about that customer data for a second. So any new experience you build, right, is going to have a user system. You're logging in, you're like, hey, it's an app. My app has users. So for each new app you roll out, you're going to have some kind of database that stores the users and their current status with that app. Are they allowed to log in? When was the last time they logged in? Things like that. With this idea of like constantly doing incremental development and like being additive and tying into what you were talking about, like this orchestration layer that's brilliant. When you want to access like robust customer data related to a user, like all you might need is like one identifier in the user table for your application that's like, here's their customer ID. And then your process APIs in MuleSoft, it's like, oh, we're authenticating a request. So this comes into the experience. It goes through, let's say, a user process API that's validating them against the user database, saying, okay, this is a real person. But it also grabs that, like, maybe it's a contact ID from Salesforce, just to have a concrete example. That's the only piece of data from Salesforce, just one ID on the user saying, hey, this user is this contact. That gets sent back up to the MuleSoft process API, which then has a follow-on request that's going to Salesforce. It's like, by the way, I want this supporting information about the user. Like maybe your app's user table is just an email address and like their authentication stuff. It's like, give me their first name, their last name, give me their address, give me their phone number. I'm putting this up in the UI. And it could be something that you're surfacing like a profile page in your app for them to edit their details. And then they edit the details in your app, but that's actually pushing the change back to your Salesforce where that data was sourced from. So having that like orchestration layer, which really shines in the process layer of the API architecture, where it's like, oh, I'm authenticating against a user. I'm grabbing a simple like identifier for this person off of my application database, and then querying some key information from other existing IT systems to flesh out my understanding of who this person is beyond just a user, and then maybe even letting them manipulate that data and push that data back into the systems it was sourced from. That's nuts. That's crazy in my mind.
Well, and I think to really break that down is that the cool thing that I see from like an optimization standpoint is, like you mentioned, to build off the topic you originally talked about, that brittleness and tightly coupled, because we've had MuleSoft in between. Like if we wanted to add that functionality into your app,
like already existing,
you don't need to also update both ends of your app. All you need to do is add that workflow. Depending on how you structure your app, right? Like it depends. But if you can already accept that JSON file as an example, if it's like, hey, I'm just getting a new field in here and I'm throwing it in this HTML table, you literally don't have to push a new change for your web app. For your web data, you don't need to push a new web app update, push a new system app update. You're literally just changing MuleSoft and adding that orchestration and enriching your data without having to do all that other DevOps.
So like really simple, really stupid example for that. Now that I understand where you wanted me to go there, like let's assume like you have your app and you're like, hey, we just authenticate and we take them to a homepage, and then somebody's like, you know what? We want this to be a more intimate, personal experience. So when we log in, we're gonna have a splash screen that says hi and like identifies them by their first name. And you're like, oh well, our user database for the app, we're not keeping their names. It's just email authentication stuff, whatever. I don't have that. Because you have the MuleSoft Process API, basically somebody goes into your front end, your Angular app, they're adding this like hello screen, but then you go into your MuleSoft process and you say, hey, when I authenticate this user, I'm going to grab that contact ID as part of my request for the authentication. I'm going to go hit an existing Salesforce system API that I already have, and I'm going to say, hey, give me the first name for this contact. Here's the ID. And then you just surface that back. And because it's coming back into the response and back into the experience API, the front end guy's just like, this is where it's located. Boom, that's it is. So you make your update to your front end to add whatever feature it is. And then you can make an update to your process layer to pull in that data piece you need that's not part of this app, but is available somewhere else.
So,
it's a small add to an existing call.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that you're literally cutting down the number of application updates that you have to do in this particular use case by half. Like you still have to update
code on the front end because MuleSoft's
it's all point. Yeah, so it's all point and click on the MuleSoft side. So you're not coding both sides of the app. You're just coding the front end of the app. And you're like, hey, go get this, and then you do the WYSIWYG to surface data. And I think that's the key focus of like how this makes, because a lot of people struggle, especially like, and the article we're gonna be coming out with next week is talking about like the delta between, or the differences between Heroku communities and Experience Cloud as an example. When to use what? And people struggle with that because they're like, oh, Lightning Web App Builder, like, yeah, you can code. A lot of it's point and click, WYSIWYG. Like, I understand that as a business user. This takes the fidelity and the flexibility you have with custom developed applications that you host on Heroku and adds the most complicated piece, which is your API. Like, that's the most complicated thing you need to get right, and turns that into a mostly WYSIWYG process. There's still system level APIs you need to develop and code. A lot of the frameworks we use have self-documenting APIs. There's still some code that needs to happen. So again, it's just continuing to move that ball to make that more accessible. So when you have a business use case that comes up and says, hey, I want to add a splash screen, or hey, I need to enrich my data. I need to add, we just bought this other company and we want to pull their data from over here, from this line of business, and we want to incorporate that into this page. And you're like, well, crap. Okay, so now I got to get that data into my backend system for the app so it knows who that is. No, we don't need to do that. We're like, hey, we've got, go update the front end, go add the place where the data is going to live, add it to your HTML table, make it look nice. And MuleSoft it's the same endpoint. You're calling this is the same call that you're getting all this data from, and MuleSoft's just going to enrich the data.
Yeah, it's going to.
I'm going to do that through all point and click. And I think that's the thing. It's like, oh wait, I could just consume this new source and then add this to this existing call and then enrich my custom developed apps. I think that's the thing that people it continues to close the gap of like the level of difficulty that people perceive with Heroku coming from the Salesforce world when building custom apps.
100%. And it's one of the things I'm most excited about. And The other thing I like about this approach, and this might get me a slap on the wrist from the MuleSoft people because it's, cost efficiency, is the idea that, like, especially if you are a smaller scale business looking to adopt MuleSoft in the early stages, like MuleSoft has made some great strides to make themselves more accessible down market. They have pricing now based on effectively like flow executions and messages, which is effectively like how many different flows are you going to need, how many requests are you pushing through them. If you're doing an implementation like this, where your system APIs or APIs generated by traditional web frameworks, your experience APIs or APIs generated by traditional front-end frameworks, then your MuleSoft implementation's at the process layer. And you're going to be consuming multiple system APIs and bringing it in, so you will still be consuming those resources, but you're consolidating your usage of those paid for resources at your process layer to achieve the interconnectivity, which is at the heart of MuleSoft's value proposition. So this kind of approach also helps you, like, if you're trying to stretch and bring MuleSoft into your tech to deliver on a vision like this, but you're cost conscious, using your internal IT's experience in the frameworks they know, this lets you stretch your MuleSoft farther and get more out of it to really sell that core of MuleSoft's value proposition.
Well, I mean, again, like Salesforce could slap you on the wrist and on the face for being a Heroku and MuleSoft evangelist here. Like, but again, like, we don't get commission checks. So like, we're here to support our customers and our partners to maximize the usage of the tools that they purchase from Salesforce. I'm hoping after this discussion, they're looking at getting more customers and be like, oh, well, we didn't get as many APIs. You know what I mean? So I think we're covered, Justin. I think You'll get a different slap.
I am okay with
high five
on the back or a high
there
five.
You go.
I'll be honest. So those are the aspects of this article. And again, I'm trying not to like completely rehash it for those of you who will read it in your downtime. But those are like the key points, like the banner takeaways for how powerful and how crazy cool this kind of an architecture is. And honestly, in a way where some people think like, oh, traditional API development or MuleSoft. And again, I like to be the 5-year-old asking, why not both? And there's a really niche need here that traditional web development has that MuleSoft fills that plays to its core strength, which to me is like a profound synergy. And I can't believe it's not more heavily marketed.
Well, I think that covers it for today. I know we wanted to have a little fun section going behind the memes. I don't know if we're going to have time for that, Peyton. What do you think? Do you think we got to cut it short or what? Because I think this has been about an hour, hasn't it?
Yeah, we're probably about at that hour mark. If you guys want to laugh at me, we could do that first meme.
Yeah, well, you know what? Why don't we save those for the next article? Because we will also, I want to tie in the do's and don'ts and some horror stories with that, because we've covered that
definitely
a little bit with that. So we'll have to save the memes for next episode, which should be in about 2 weeks. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. For those of you tune in and who are watching after the fact, like, subscribe, blah, 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 YouTube stuff. But again, if there's anything you guys want to see us cover, if you have any questions or comments, or you found this content interesting, please do drop us a comment, shoot Peyton an email, and give us a call. More than happy to discuss. Again, send us your feedback. So guys, take care. Thanks so much. And this has been another great episode. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.